this is Sean Botley with Clear Technologies, and I'm about to show a demonstration of how to perform a live kernel update on AIX 720. Now first, let me give an overview of my environment. I have a Power 8 S814 with the 840 level of firmware. I have HMC code version 884 with VIOS 224 and of course AIX 720. Now this is a brand new feature that was introduced in AIX 7.2, and there are a plethora of requirements. Now I'm not going to go in detail over them, but I will give you a resource at the end of this documentation that covers it in quite a fair amount of detail. Now this is actually being performed on early ship code. This level has not released yet, so I do not have official pub documentation to reference either. But I promise you the resource that I share at the end is quite valuable. Okay, so this is a quick, dirty overview of the steps required. Now, like I said, there's a lot of prereqs, so be sure and do your homework and read up on it. You'll actually see an outline of a lot of the prereqs when the checks are performed. But in a nutshell, I'm going to update this file called lvupdate.data. It's got information in it like what's your HMC IP address and what are the name of the disk devices that we're going to use during the live kernel update. During this early ship testing, we have to have 4 free disks available that are of adequate size to host root VG. So that's what you will see in my test. The expectation is by the time that it GAs, the requirement will only be 2. However, that still may change. So you have to authenticate the LPAR with the HMC. You can do that using this HMC auth command. I will show my example. Then this can only be performed by using the gen install command specifically. And again, a very high level overview of what a live kernel update does is it's actually going to create another LPAR partition using an alternate root VG that it applies the fix to and then activate that partition and move the workload over. This does stay all within the same frame. So because I mentioned there are so many prereqs, you really want to run this preview install first. Look very carefully through the list and make sure there are no errors. I guarantee you if there's a single one, your installation will not work. After you've successfully completed all the preview callouts without any errors, you can go ahead and perform the installation. Now once it kicks off and runs, it doesn't require any attention, but it does take a fair amount of time. I've already recorded some video of performing the update. I've time condensed it by maybe a 4th or a 5th. I didn't edit out a lot of the time during the operations. So it may be quite boring to watch, but you can see all the steps that it performs. Lastly, before I get to the demo, as I mentioned, AIX 720 at the time of creating this demo has not been released, so there is no official online documentation for this feature through the Knowledge Center yet. However, my good friend and colleague Chris Gibson out of Australia has already written a fantastic article on performing live updates, so I strongly recommend using the information here. I wish I would have found it before I started mine. It would have saved me a bit of grief, so I promise you it's quite useful. Okay, so real quick, this is the video that I recorded previously of performing the live kernel update. At the top I've got my HMC window with my partition AIX 7.2 with an ID of 21. My first terminal session, I'm just going to show some of the config information and run the preview install from. In the second terminal session down at the bottom, I'm going to show some status updates about the disks, when an alternate is created and when the LPAR ID changes and stuff like that. So you can see here in my LV update data file, I've got the disk numbers of the 4 disks that I need, and then if I scroll down here a little bit, you can see that I've got my HMC IP address and user ID in it. So I have to authenticate using HMC auth. And then the next thing I want to do is run a preview. So similar to any other install of updates, it's doing a prereq check to make sure that all the conditions apply, and there's a plethora of conditions that must apply for live kernel update to succeed. So you'll want to review the document that I referenced previously from Chris Gibson and review this output carefully. Make sure it really does say everything has passed, that there are no errors, because if there are, it obviously will not work. And once you have success on running the preview, then we will go ahead and tell it to perform the live update. Just going to remove the -p flag here so it won't do the preview. Now, of course, just like usual, it still performs all those same prereq checks to make sure that all conditions are met before performing the live update. So at the bottom, I'm just going to scroll here and start showing. Oh, looks like got interrupted by the message that live update's about to start, but I'm just going to scroll the output of the disk status every 5 seconds, and then if I come back up, you can see that it says it's in progress and it's validating the LPAR. It's requesting resources. You can see at the top that my LPAR has already been renamed with an underscore LKU0 on the end of it. You can also see that now I have a new partition with the same name as the original partition, but of course it has a new ID. And in this case it's ID 22 because it happens to be the next ID available on my system. So while that's running, I'm actually going to show an LPAR stat that my LPAR is now showing the LKU0 suffix on it, and I will set up a loop to show the disks and the LPAR status, because when it finishes performing the move to the new partition, it of course will resume its previous identity of AIX 7.2. So from here on out, it's actually going to be quite boring for the next 10 minutes or so, but we'll be able to see here from the first terminal session where I executed the live update that I will constantly get feedback of what's going on. You can see in the bottom terminal that now you see an alternate inst root VG show up, and that the output is telling me that it's creating a root VG for the surrogate. The surrogate is the new partition that has been created. So there's log files that actually have names in them that of ORIG for original, which is the source partition, and then one for the surrogate as well. So while this is continuing to run, I'll pause this every so often just to try to condense down the video time. So now you can see that it showed that the alternate has disappeared from this system. Well, that's because that is now being used to activate the new surrogate partition, which we can actually see at the top of the screen. The HMC reference codes are going by, and it's showing that that partition is running. So now you can see it's creating a mirrored copy of the original root VG. And similar to creating the alternate, this will take a few minutes to create the mirror and actually get that mirror in sync. So now it says it's moving the workload to the surrogate partition. And as this gets closer to finishing the cutover, there's the blackout period, and now you can see my status at the bottom that I've got a new partition ID and that I'm back to the original partition name. Okay, so now it says the workload is running on the new surrogate. So everything is up and running on the other side, and then part of the cleanup work that it will do is it will actually remove the original source partition. We will see that AIX 72LKU0 will disappear at some point. So it has deactivated the original partition. You can see that it's showing a status of not activated now, and then it will clean it up. And now if you look at the HMC, that ID 21 and LKU0 is now gone. And the live AIX update has completed. So that's it. It's nothing fancy to actually see, but that is the result of a successful AIX live update. You can see that my partition doesn't exist anywhere on my HMC anymore. So the original partition with the ID of 21 is gone. So as always, thanks for watching.